Welcome, everybody. Looking forward to having this conversation. And uh, this is going to be an exciting addition and next webinar in our series of blended finance webinars for Canada and for the community that is passionate about catalyzing capital to both scale impact, but then also to um, really, combine philanthropic capital with more mainstream capital, attract more mainstream capital into the world of impact as well. And so very, very excited for this conversation. We'll probably take a few minutes here at the beginning just to allow people to settle in and become a part of this. So for those who have joined, as you can see by my name tag, my name is Keith, and I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Spring Collective, and Spring Impact Capital, and we exist to change the world through innovation. And so we're absolutely thrilled to be here today. As we are starting to have everybody settle in, just as a reminder to everyone, this is the latest in our series of blended finance talks, case studies and examples to help inform and fuel the blended finance movement in Canada. And as we're starting to prepare to bring Carla onto the screen, I just want to give a big shout out and gratitude to Tracy Robertson and Ontario Trillium Foundation for being the visionary supporter of this movement. In addition to that, I also want to give a shout out to the team at Rally Assets, the team at Mars Discovery District, Christy and the team at Thrive Impact Fund, and the entire team at Spring Collective, including Vivian McCormick, Selena, and the rest of the team who are an important part of our community and the work that we do. So really exciting as well, just as an aside, to see people starting to put comments into chat. Joanne, fabulous to see you here. I anticipate we'll see some familiar names and faces over the next hour as we go through this process. So just so that you know, we're actually going to go through a format where Carla and I are going to spend about 35 to 40 minutes in conversation. And during that time, it's our goal to have you start to think about your prompt questions. What are the questions that you want to ask Carla of the work that they've been doing, and how they've been doing it, and how blended finance has had a big impact on their work. So we'll start with that fireside chat format, and then what we'll do is we'll move into Q&A, at which point in time Vivian from the Spring team will join us to help navigate that Q&A process and really move forward from there. So without further ado, I would love to bring Carla to the stage so that we can chat. Hey, Carla, how you doing?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So just as a prelude, everybody, Carla and I had a chance to actually meet in person last week in Ottawa during the Sustainable Finance Forum, which was actually a fantastic two-day convening of sustainable finance practitioners from across Canada. Also saw Tracy there in person. And so really an opportunity as well to see some of the momentum around blended finance specifically in that world. But what I would love to do is I would love to kick things off, Carla, by having you give us a synopsis of Just Like Family Home Care. How did the organization start, and what you're all about and the impact that you're creating?
Great. Thanks, Keith. So we are one of the first social acquisitions by a coalition of charities in Canada. So we didn't actually start our impact from scratch. I think that's an important part of this, which is why we needed to leverage blended finance so much. And we have a story of our blended finance needs emerging and changing over time. The first need was really the first acquisition. So we had a church in Victoria who decided that they wanted to buy a social enterprise. And the reason they wanted to buy one is so that they could provide impact almost immediately. So the church ended up buying the Just Like Family Home Care in Victoria. So very, very much where many people here are located. And when they did that, they actually needed three types of finance, actually, maybe four. The first one was they needed a grant to even see if a church could own something like this. So they got a $5,000 grant in order to hire a lawyer in order to structure what it would look like.
Mm.
So that was a grant. The second
Right.
layer of their blended finance was they actually used their own endowment as equity. So the church had their own foundation. They were able to take that money and invest it to buy the first franchise.
Mm.
What they also ended up doing is they ended up getting a line of credit from the United Church of Canada at 8% interest in order to scale faster.
Mm.
So then they were able to hire people, have the staff, and to get, I think that they started on January 1st, and their first client was January 2nd
Right.
in 2020. So imagine how quick that is when you buy a franchise. Fantastic.
Absolutely, man.
And
Yeah.
then the fourth type they had is they had a ROFR, so a right of first refusal to buy another franchise, being Nanaimo. And so the church, having already bought this, already got the line of credit, already invested and felt like they were at capacity of what they could do, when they had this ROFR had to be exercised, so they had to buy it or they were going to lose the opportunity. They came back to the United Church of Canada and got a zero interest 3-year loan in order to actually acquire the second location. So they would not allow that opportunity to pass them by. So in this first example, blended finance made the opportunity even possible that it otherwise would not have been. And then
Right.
it ensured that an additional opportunity did not pass them by. That's the first case. Do you want me to jump into the second one?
I think that'd be fantastic. And just as an aside, Carla, just first really appreciate how you've walked us through, what the origin was. Maybe remind people what the problem is that you're trying to solve with the organization, because I think this will really lead well into the next cases and what you're trying to scale. Yeah.
Right. So I think what was interesting about the very first acquisition or the first purchase of Just Like Family Home Care is that the church was looking for a new revenue stream, which many charities and nonprofits are looking for.
Mm.
So they looked at what was something that they could invest in that could generate income that is outside of their normal donations that also was impactful. So let's
Mm.
have our cake and eat it too. And so home care being something that churches know a lot about, being seniors, they realized that that was something that they would have strength in. And they wanted to create the impact in both caregivers as well as seniors' lives almost immediately. So that was the first challenge.
Thank you very much. Love to have you move into the second phase,
Yeah.
and just kind of walk us through that as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I think what's really important as we go into the second set of blended finance is just contrasting it to what was needed when you first get started. Right. So
Mm.
the first one started with a grant, and you can see how we layered other pieces into it. The second one was this idea that the Just Like Family Home Care in Victoria scaled and grew faster than any of the other franchises had. And that's because of the social capital of a charity owning a business as well. And so what ended up happening is that the founder of Just Like Family Home Care, based out of Vancouver, he had started the business in 2010. He actually recognized that maybe this church could buy the whole thing. So the franchisor. So at
Mm.
this point in time, the church owned two Just Like Family Home Cares, being in Victoria and Nanaimo. And then the founder of the franchisor had decided, hey, would you be interested in the whole thing? Now you can imagine buying head office of McDonald's is a lot different than buying a McDonald's restaurant.
Yeah.
So the church, and I was the head of innovation with the United Church of Canada at the time, reached out to me and said, hey, Carla, you've supported us with the other blended finance approach. What would it look like if we actually purchased the whole thing? And remember, this was already something that was a network revenue of over $10 million. So
Mm.
when you start from scratch, it takes some time to grow. So it had taken them 12 years to get to that point in time with 27 locations. And so what you can do when you acquire a business at such a scale, so leveraging blended finance to do that, you can actually make more impact quicker because you're already at that critical point where in 2 years, you can actually double your impact versus it taking 12 years to get to that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
So within 2 years, we are now over 20 million in network revenue as opposed to 10 million network revenue in the first 12 years.
Mm.
So what happened for this one is it's completely different. We're not going to be eligible for grants. We're actually creating a for-profit holding company, and it's a social purpose holding company. We raise the money as direct equity investments from multiple charities and impact investors. So we raise the money with 54% owned by charities, so three different charitable organizations, and then 9 impact investors who are individuals, also all accredited. And so we raised the equity on that, and we had a gap being our debt. So we went to financial institutions to raise the debt, and we needed the debt to make sure that the charities owned over 50%. The reason that was important is that we have baked in the impact, because the charities have majority ownership collectively, not as an individual, but collectively. So we raised the debt that would allow the charities to have a majority say, and bake in our governance that we would continue to provide or create impact through this model.
Now, talk a little bit about, thank you for all of that. Talk a little bit about when you presented your case study at the Blended Finance Summit in February of this year. Where were you at specifically on your journey at this point, and what was your ask to the room?
Okay, so I had 2, because why go with one? Just you never know who's in the room, right?
Absolutely.
And I think a big part about finance and finding the right investors or partners is that many people have different focuses. And so what I really wanted to see is, what do people have an appetite for in the room? So the third acquisition, which I haven't talked about, Keith, is actually why I had an ask. When we bought Just Like Family Home Care National in May of 2022, 50 days later, Toronto territory, which represents 2.75 million people, was one territory, came up for resale. Now, as the franchisor, I now have a ROFR, remember, the right of first refusal to buy back all of Toronto. So we exercised that. But this is 50 days after I've raised all the money to buy the whole thing. And I don't want to dilute the ownership of my charities, because remember, we structured the whole thing to make sure the charities have majority ownership. They would not have an appetite for me to go back for more money, right? Because they've just invested. It hasn't been proven yet. So what we ended up doing is we actually canvassed for private debt, 100% debt, to buy back Toronto. Now, I already had debt, right, to make sure that, so we have this capital stack, which is blended finance, in place. And so my challenge is that as you have more debt, you're seeing your interest increase because you have higher risk.
Correct.
And so you have to provide your investor higher reward. And so what I ended up having to do is I had a 12% debt load on my top. And so my first ask last year was to refinance just under like a couple $100,000 of debt that I was paying 12% at. Right. And even worse, I had it structured that it was accruing. So 12% accruing was starting to become quite a burden. And especially based on the impact that we were seeing that we were making. We had been making seniors' lives better. We had more BIPOC ownership across the country, more charitable ownership, and we're improving the lives of our caregivers. So we're making all this impact, but we had this debt load. So the first thing was a refi. Can we refinance our 12% down to something that is going to reduce that burden on us? The second ask was $1 million is what we had quoted to actually raise equity to enter the States. So right now, actually today, we're at 45 locations across Canada, continuing to grow. Thank you very much. I would expect us to be potentially at 47 by the end of the year. And when I was looking at going into the States, we were looking at having another charitable partner to enter the States with. What was fantastic about last year is that I thought I needed $1 million. But what I really needed, and I got this feedback from all my table, which was phenomenal, was I actually only needed $500,000. And then I needed an additional letter of credit or some sort of flex for the ups and downs of my cash flow to enter the States. So what was really interesting for me is going to a room like that, thinking about the problem. So refi, which is something that more of our impact investors in Canada has understood, and then equity, but realizing we didn't have to dilute it at $1 million, we could dilute it at $500,000, and then have other unique vehicles that you create in your blended capital.
Yeah. So I think what's really important in this process, at least from my perspective, what you're sharing is just an understanding that when we are looking at blended finance opportunities, having a like an open conversation across the table and saying, hey, what's an opportunity here? What does it look like? How do we start to actually think a little bit more creatively about how we can fuel this organization for sustainability and impact? And I think what you just shared was a great catalyst to that. Now, there is a question that I have in the arc of what you shared. You made it an important point where you said, hey, we want charities to have 50% or more ownership in this. And we wanted to do that as one of the tools and one of the approaches to ensure that the impact mandate stays really hardwired into the organization. And so my question for you is, for the impact investors who came alongside those charities, how did they respond to that 50% kind of requirement? Did you have to have a conversation about, did that introduce risk or did it reinforce the impact? What was that conversation like, and how did you help the impact investors to come alongside in a way that got them really excited?
Oh boy. I think it goes to finding um finding that matchmaking that I think many of us
Mhm.
are always looking for, is finding the perfect people. Remember, I spoke to 187 charities. I've said that many times, only 3 said yes. And then I spoke to hundreds of other individuals to consider this.
Mhm.
So it was people who really understood that charities have a role to do direct equity investments. And they
Mhm.
recognize that being part of this and journeying with them allowed this mindset to change of what our roles are as accredited investors, because charities are accredited investors at a certain threshold. It's $150,000 of investable assets. So it's a
Mhm.
much lower threshold that we have this opportunity to actually get involved in the marketplace. And so
Mhm.
for them, that was the vision that they saw. They also saw the vision of a social purpose holding company as the tip of the iceberg of how this is our first acquisition. Like, remember, we purchased this. We purchased then back Toronto. We actually now are running North Vancouver. We're looking at other. I mean, we'll get there, Keith, but we're looking at other things too. But with
Yeah.
the framework and the setup, once you learn how to do this, and once you start to create your balance sheet, there's possibilities. So they saw across the board the vision of that, of changing the landscape of capitalism, really,
Mhm.
of who owns things matters.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's incredibly well shared. And I think part of the benefit of the approach that you've taken is you really did create a scenario whereby those charities also could invest, not only because of the fact that they're allowed and there's, kind of guardrails upon which they can do that, but you were able to bring impact investing capital alongside to allow the whole deal to happen, so that that the whole process would work. And I think that that's really important to this kind of point in time. And so maybe what I would love to do is speak now a little bit to some of the lessons learned in this process. What's worked, what might you do differently in the future, or next time, or what would you recommend other people do? And maybe what have some of the challenges been?
Yes, okay. um, I think the biggest challenge specifically of working with nonprofits and charities as investors has just been the speed of doing business.
Mm,
So acting like a for-profit when you have the governance structures to make decisions. And so what we've worked really, really hard on is to have that. The fastest charity that I've ever seen is still slower than an impact investor as an individual.
mm,
Right. And so the reason that we were able to even acquire this business is because of the individuals that you're talking about, Keith. So thank you. Without them, we actually wouldn't, in a blended finance approach, which is like, let's do things that isn't possible otherwise. Without our individual impact investors, we would not have been able to move fast enough, and we would have lost the deal. And also, when you have the capital ready to go like this, you actually do often get a discount, right?
mm,
So if you're able to waive financing conditions and reduce the strain on a seller and any of the anxiety, because this becomes very emotional to them, they're selling you their baby, that
exactly.
you do get a discount. You also
Mhm.
often get a discount if you're talking about legacy and difference and caring about the stakeholder and the community that they've been serving. And so
Mm,
again, that's another reason to have a discount. So my lessons, if I were to say, if you're looking at doing this, stop trying to follow the check boxes and the rule book. Come up with what works and then
mm,
work backwards. I think that what I've learned through this process is that you can paper anything. So what you have to really understand is like, what is the blended finance approach that's actually going to make this possible?
right.
So in this case, we talked about, I've done grants, we've done zero interest loan. We've literally done the whole gambit of the social finance continuum. And
Mm,
so in each case, what is the end results? What does my debt load? What is possible there? What isn't possible there? Who are the players? Does it all have to be equity? Equity is very patient often, not all the time.
mm,
And so I work backwards. I figure out what I need it to look like, and then I go to the players who might fit that puzzle piece.
mm,
I also have learned that ask for what you need. I think what's been really great about the ecosystem that is being created here with many of the players that you've mentioned, thank you, Keith, of, SVX, OTF, Spring, Thrive, like all the players, is that I tell more people about what I'm doing. It's not that people directly invested themselves, but they probably got me to through a gatekeeper, or they got me to the person who was a fit.
right.
And I think at the event that we were at last week, that happened again. Literally,
Mm,
someone knew about what we're looking at, someone knew about something that we're excited about, and I had the meeting I wouldn't have had otherwise.
mhm,
Um, and I think that goes to my last is building coalitions. I think the thing I'm most proud about this social acquisition of the franchisor was that it wasn't one charity; it was three.
mm,
And so the ripple effects and their mindset change is going to continue to have more and be even more expansive, which is really exciting to me. I would suggest if you are looking to buy a business, diversify your risk by not doing it by yourself. So that's going to diversify your due diligence and allow you to maybe invest in multiple things. That's going to be even more learning. It's going to give you more deal flow. And you're not just changing as an organization, but you're actually inspiring others to change with you.
mm. So, thank you for all of that. There's a few things that I was thinking about as you were sharing. The first one is you talked a little bit about the discount and first, an ability to waive conditions, et cetera, but also the ability to tell the story, the mission, the vision, right? Where there's values alignment. How much of sharing the mission and vision and the values and these intended impacts and outcomes, how did that also impact you going the other way with the investors, and
Mhm.
how maybe that helped them to think about a combination of terms across these blended finance vehicles that actually really not only allowed you to get the financing, but get it at terms that actually would allow the organization to thrive, you know?
So I mean, I don't know what answer you're expecting, Keith. Maybe you're not. So talking about the impact was much, much harder
Right.
because home care is so misunderstood. So what we do is we support seniors and individuals with disabilities aging in place in their homes, wherever they choose to continue to live. And when you think about this, there's not a lot of understanding because the market's not completely mature at this point. And people don't like to talk about aging in place and death and dying until it happens.
Hmm.
Right. So it's not a normal narrative that we have. So we don't actually know how to purchase home care. So
Mm,
when I came into the space, I didn't know anything about franchising or home care. And when I was looking at this space, I didn't know actually the true value proposition of just like family home care because it was kind of muddy.
right.
And so when I came in and we were saying, but we're just better, it's better, we care more.
Mm,
So that's not very tangible. That's very intangible as a service. So how do you show that? Um, and it was only until I acquired the business and got into it that we saw all the business processes, how we had recruited franchise partners, the type of training that we did. And we actually, I would say, unschool people in business.
mm,
So a lot of times we have registered nurses and personal support workers and healthcare aides as our franchise partners, and they show up trying to sell in what they think they're supposed to do, and we have to deprogram them.
right.
But for my investors, that's a heavy, like, how would they believe that? It was very tricky to sell
Mm,
that.
Hmm.
So it was after the fact that we've seen increase in BIPOC ownership. 7% of our franchise partners are paying above median pay for HCAs. Like, it's after the fact that we actually realized the real outcomes that we could provide.
Hmm.
Until you got into the rabbit hole, we didn't know. So ironically, we actually focused on the numbers.
Right.
We focused on the tailwinds of the industry. We
Hmm.
knew that we could make a difference in seniors' lives because of what the church had done in Victoria and Nanaimo. We knew that it would make an impact in caregivers because they were treated with dignity and respect, and we rolled out health spending accounts and living wages. But we didn't actually know all the impacts until we got in. It's actually, whenever I talk to Cordell Jacks at Regenerative Capital, that's what we talk about, is like, until you actually get into some of these businesses that are maybe legacy businesses, businesses that are overlooked because they're not sexy or technology, there are huge rabbit holes of impact that we can make.
Well, and what's really important in what you shared is that you're talking about there is there's a certain level of what I will call known impact.
Mm,
And then there is forecasted impact, like where you believe it will happen. And then there's what I will call unintended impact, right? These serendipitous or fortuitous things that happen that as you scale the organization, as you grow an organization, impacts that maybe you couldn't even foresee start to unfold. And so I really love that kind of like three-tier component.
mhm,
And but at the same time, you led with the financials because it also allowed you to de-risk this investment opportunity, right? And so I think that's a very important component here is when you talk about the financials, the financial sustainability of an organization, et cetera, you're helping to de-risk the investment for whether it's a charity or an impact investor or anybody in between. And then when you talk about impact, you have like known impact, so you de-risk, but then there's also this future potential, right? And so maybe talk a little bit about some of the lessons that you've learned about how you de-risked the impact in like this impact investing opportunity, because I typically find that often investors are thinking about risk and maybe even thinking more about it in the context of an impact investment than say a market investment. And so how
mhm.
did you help them de-risk this deal to the point of saying yes?
Um, so an interesting thing when you're fundraising is that everyone wants to talk about growth, but they're always questioning whether or not you're boosting.
Mm,
So you have this really interesting thing that you want to show potential, and yet
mm,
if you're not hyper conservative, no one believes you.
right.
But they still want this number, but they want you to act like this. We within home care, in the home care space, there's a reason that people in the news, you hear this narrative about private home care companies. It is a great business model. It has high growth potential. We're not even close to reaching the peak of it. And so going into an industry that's already known for tailwinds and a great business model, we were
Mhm,
able to actually infuse more value, more of our values and more of our impact than in almost any other business model that we could have looked at. So
mm,
there just the timing of this investment was almost perfect, right?
right.
So the model that I just described, it actually worked for us. What was important, which I mean, last year I talked about refinancing. Well, we did have someone come in at 12%, and we were continuing to pay our interest, continuing to grow. Like I said, in 2 years, we doubled our network revenue. Well, guess what? In the summer, we did refinance from 12% down to
Okay.
6.5%. So they saw us being able to pay off debt. So it's not that I had to do everything all at once. I actually got what I needed at the time that I needed it, proved myself out for a year, and then I was able to refinance at almost half the interest rate. So that's one way that we do it. The other thing that we've been able to do is um, I I'm I'm actually really excited about our next stage of exit. So what the reason that we bought it the way that we have is to continue to grow. I'm hoping to double in size again in the next 2 years, 3 years. And what we would end up doing is have an exit event of all of our individual impact investors. We've invited them to exit in 2 to 3 years and to be replaced by more charitable investors now that we've stabilized the business, grown it into a high dividend yield, and actually have paid off all of our debt at that point in time, or at least even more, so that we have a high dividend yield. And then these individual impact investors would be working with us at the next acquisition that we would do. So we have almost lead investors who are willing to take the risk, stabilize the business, exit into a high dividend for more charitable ownership in the future. That's actually how we've designed that is our plan.
Great. And thank you for that. And how have the discussions gone so far with those impact investors around preparing for that? And then the second question is, what else is next for the organization? What's coming up?
Right. So those individuals, I think what is neat about a private investment like this is it's very uncommon to do what I just described, to have a planned exit. It's very
Absolutely.
common that your planned exit is probably 7 to 10 years, just like what a private equity firm would do. However, for us, this is going to continue to grow, and it is a high dividend business. So it is an ideal investment for accredited investors as charities. So our individuals are excited about that opportunity. They bought in at the get-go because of having more charities owning businesses. So this just seems like a natural next step for them. And they're excited about the deal flow as well as our position in the sector around buying more businesses. So they're already like, what's next? I've had some of my investors say, hey, could you look at something environmental? So they're actually giving me things that they want us to see. So that leads into the what's next. We are continuing to expand. Like I said, we would be at 47 by the end of this year is what my anticipation is. We're looking to master franchise our Quebec brand, and we are looking for a charity or a nonprofit to be the owner. We're already speaking to a collection of 11 churches in Washington, D.C. to consider master franchise or like starting to move in that direction. We have interest across the states when it comes to our existing franchise partners wanting to actually buy into some of our marketplaces when we enter the states. So that brings me to the second part of last year when I was raising $1 million to enter the states. So not only did we half it and then think about a letter of credit for the other additional $500,000, it really seems that instead of doing that, actually going to my existing franchise partners for pre-sales, speaking and learning about master franchises in Quebec to then see whether or not what that looks like, having charitable owners in the States as well, that actually we can self-finance it. So again, it's kind of looking at what it looks like. You kind of feed it to the ether. You see what your actual numbers need to be. Is there another approach to that using blended finance? In this case, I'm actually doing pre-sales. So at the time that I could accept deposits, I can do different things to actually enter into the States. And especially with my existing franchise partners, the fact that they're excited about this really, again, validates our business model, validates the value that we've already been providing to our network.
Absolutely. Well shared. I'm going to ask you a final question, and then what we're going to do is we're going to get Vivian to join us. We'll transition into the Q&A portion with the audience. But you've had a very diverse journey in terms of how you have leveraged blended finance and the relationships with charities and impact investors alike to get to where you are now and to kind of unlock this potential. What do you think we need to do as an ecosystem to further unlock more capital in support of impact organizations through blended finance? What has your experience told you, and what would you do as a call to action to the room?
Wow.
No pressure though,
I can tell you where I'm starting from. So, I mean, we're definitely open source as an organization. We're very excited about creating a social purpose holding company. Having a structure like we do means that we're ready. We're ready to actually co-invest with other organizations, but also as an operator. So that's been something that's really important, is being able to lean in quickly. For us, we're also trying to build out our balance sheet. So our balance sheet so that we can take on debt if we need to quickly. The fact that we have the network of co-investors potentially as opportunities arise. I would say for you out there is understanding what capital you might have ready quickly if an opportunity arises. Because when they come, I mean, we waived conditions in 82 days. So thinking about your board structure, thinking about the council trustees, your investment committee, who, whatever your decision-making path is, how is that created? I can tell you one of the most important conversations I had with a charity the other day is they heard about this. They go, I'd love to co-invest with you. I actually have a potential deal on the table for them. And they said, well, don't we need to actually have all of our membership vote on this? And I said, hold the phone. Like, did you get all your membership to vote when you bought a GIC?
Mhm.
Did you do it when you invested in oil and gas, which is not aligned with what you're about? So why do you have to have a membership vote? So understanding as charities and organizations, actually what is the decision that needs to be made? It probably doesn't need to be, do we buy a business? The
Mhm.
decision is, do we have short-term, medium-term, long-term investments? Are they diversified? What does diversification looks like? This is our investment thesis or plan. Great. That's what we decide. Don't
Mm.
make them decide on every business decision. Make that a smaller group of people so that you can actually move.
Yeah, I love that piece. And I think for me, what's really important in what you just shared is sometimes making sure that when we connect with organizations, take a step back and say, have you laid out what you just described? Because if they have, then to your point, then it's an opportunity to say, great, we can execute against that portfolio approach, against our investment thesis, against our impact thesis, et cetera. But it's also a call to action, I think, for organizations that if they haven't done that yet, that's the piece you want to put in place. Make sure you have the impact thesis, make sure you have your portfolio approach, such that when they do see opportunities like just like family home care, that they actually can step into it with not only the confidence that it's thesis aligned and it's within their portfolio approach, but also that they know that they have the support of the organization, the members behind them, et cetera, depending on the structure of that org. So
Yeah.
really appreciate that share.
One more thing, Keith, because I think they
Please.
need to channel their Dragon's Den. Like when you think about the dragons on Dragon's Den, every single one of them that looks at an investment, they always think actually how their background and their skill set can actually add value to the business.
Oh my
And I
goodness. Yeah.
can't not tell you how many times I've spoken to charities where it's more like, what can you do for me? And I'm like,
Mhm.
wait a minute. When you're investing in a business with me, we're partners.
Yeah.
Like we're in the same boat together. So it's the mutuality. It's not transactional. It's highly relational. So even doing what the asset-based assessment of yourself, like what are the strengths and abundance that you're providing along with an investment? Channel
Mhm.
your inner dragon's den, and it actually allows you to look even more creatively at some of the investment opportunities out there.
Well, and I think, what you talked about there, if people are investing as a partner, right, in this process, what do you bring? Everybody thinks they just bring capital, but they bring industry experience, they bring experience with the problem set, they bring potentially business model experience, they bring a network of other capital providers, potentially partners, potentially customers, potentially even employees, right? And so, and then I think there's the hidden benefit sometimes with people is in this relationship, also exit alignment, right? Like you talked about this. Do they want to be 7 to 10 year patient? Do they want to be 3 to 5 years supportive? Both are excellent, but I think you really give them that stack of like, here's all the ways that you can contribute beyond a check. And it's really powerful, right? And so I just wanted to just summarize that well as we transition into Q&A. And Vivian has joined us. So Vivian, fantastic to see you here. Vivian, would love to have you lead us through the Q&A process.
Yeah, awesome. This is such a great conversation, Carla. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. It's there's so many parallels, right? Like this type of transaction, when people hear blended finance, they get a bit squirrely, like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to figure out what that means or how to do it. But there's so many principles that are the exact same as when you are preparing yourself for investment, when you are preparing yourself for borrowing, you have to get your ducks in order. And then also these investors, as you said, like it is a two-way street. You should be interviewing your investors at the same time. And so it's really nice to almost remind everyone that it is very similar. This is not hugely different. And a lot of times what all kinds of ventures are doing is blended in some way. It's just that we really want to try to make it like absolutely concurrent, as opposed to you get your investment, then you can get some debt, et cetera, et cetera. Like, let's see how we can bring people in all together. And because you have so many parties, oftentimes when that happens, everyone's got to be ready, and everyone's got to be ready to jump in. So the other thing that I loved is that your excitement about what is to come and what else can happen is like infectious. So thank you for that. I was like, yes, what else can we do? Who else can we bring in? So I think our group here has been really engaged. I have two questions in the chat, but then also I'm just going to open it up for people to raise their hand using the little function on the bottom of their Zoom screen if they want to reach out and ask you or Keith directly a question. The first one I think is quite a quick question. Anita just wanted to know which church you had referenced as doing work with seniors in Nanaimo.
Oh, Broadview United Church. They're actually
Broadview.
based, yeah, I'll put in the chat. They're
Thanks.
based in Victoria.
Okay, wonderful. And Joanne's question is about, you referenced high dividend. Do you have a particular percentage range, rule of thumb that you're looking at when you reference that?
So I took a little bit of a different approach. What I really love about direct equity investments is most investors at that point realize that they don't expect returns for the first few years. You're in high growth. That means that any of your retained earnings are going back into, well, in my case, debt as well as investment. Like we have a brand new, beautiful website, we're doing videos, like all the things, we're scaling up the team. So their understanding is that they would not get a dividend for 5 years. However, at the point of 5 years that we start actually, we have normalized income and normalized expenses. So you're at that, that's kind of the goal, and you're still growing at whatever percentage it is that you've projected there. That in year 5, I would dividend out exactly how much equity they had put in. And I would do that every year thereafter. Wow. So if you put $100,000 in year 5, you get $100,000 back and $100,000 every year thereafter.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So I actually really, I'm just going to highlight something here. So you gave yourself, or the business and the trajectory of the business said, hey, 5-year horizon, where we're going to take this capital, we're going to invest it in the business, we're going to reinvest it in the business, we're going to grow it. So you said, let's get the organization to a place where it's financially sustainable and it's thriving. Then what I can do is I can return the capital, and then I can continue to place that out. And what that helps, I think, with the investors is they know they've gotten their original capital back. They're now getting the return on investment beyond that. But it also sets now some parameters upon which you can have that that exit event in 2 to 3 years, right? Because now people have a stability, like a stable understanding of that. There's a certainty and a surety to that. How much has that helped you in your investor engagement to have that kind of like consistency of returns?
Yeah, I mean, for them, it means that they're not pestering me every week about, how the business is going. They have a common understanding of like the growth trajectory. I do quarterly updates with them. We have our AGM that's in place. I keep them aware of anything that is substantial for the business operations, but it's more light touch, which allows me to be more nimble and to not be bogged down in that work. So it's actually a management capacity piece that's really critical at the stage of growth that we're at. So we're focused more on B2B partnerships nationally. We've landed 5 this year that are exceptional. We're on track for next year to double that. So, and they're partnerships that are actually generating revenue, right? So that is where we can then focus our attention rather than to nervous investors. Our investors are not nervous. They're very understanding. They're in this for the long haul.
That's great. Now, I do want to touch on a quick question just to extend on that a little bit, if that's okay, Vivian. I hope that's okay.
You get one more, and then I'm going to throw it to Jane.
You're going to cut me off. Carla, early on in our discussion, you talked about the number of charities and the number of investors you spoke to get to the small subset that actually invested. what did you learn from that process, both in terms of what would you recommend um, social impact organizations to take away from that to maybe increase the conversion rate, right? Like maybe less is more. Like, is there a way to find greater alignment or targeting when seeking capital? Or do you think that's just kind of the way it's going to be? And then put yourself on the other side of the table. What would you recommend investors, foundations, organizations to actually say to the market to make it easier for the matchmaking to occur?
You're not allowed to give me two questions at once again.
Yeah, you snuck in an extra one. That's
It was a
a
bit of a
red
bonus, I will
red
say.
card. What's the racing? We were talking about racing beforehand. What's the racing? Yellow flag? Is that a no, it's not.
Yes.
Caution. Yeah, caution.
Caution, that's right.
So I do think that the ecosystem is growing. Like from 2.5 years ago when I raised this money, actually it's 3 years ago almost now at this point, to where we are now, it's completely different. I will say that 3 years ago, I learned that my superpower was being said no to
Mhm.
and being able to shake it off and to keep going and to still have the same kind of energy behind it. I also saw that I knew that my numbers were so hyper conservative that they were ridiculous. Like
Mm.
I had dropped them so far down that,
Mm.
I mean, knock on wood, but it felt almost impossible to fail based on how low they were. Right. So
Mhm.
I had gone so far the other way, just
Right.
because I had so many people's questions that were so hyper conservative.
Mhm.
I can also tell you that I'm not technically fundraising right now, and yet I still go to every single event. So I
Mhm.
think that if this is something that you're looking to do and this is something that you're out there for, you still have to network. You have to build the relationships. You have to build the credibility because in the end, people actually invest in people. They don't invest in just ideas.
Yeah,
And
well said.
so it's not that I need the money right now, but if I do, I probably have the 100 people that I can approach.
Well
Right.
said.
So it's an ongoing relationship piece that I take really seriously. And then I completely got lost on your second question.
Second question was really just what recommendations or suggestions you might give funders, investors,
Mm.
about how they communicate out into the market so that it's maybe easier for aligned opportunities to approach them as opposed to every opportunity.
I think I'd say the same thing as going to the network events and having more champions to understand what your messaging are. So most of the
Mhm.
time that I found an alignment, it's actually not me directly, it's been through someone else.
Yeah.
Right. So you're going to have some of those people who are hyper connected who do that. I will say that I also pay it forward now. So when I meet someone who's an operator or a fund manager who's doing fundraising, um, I think through all the conversations that I've had, and I help on that matchmaking. Um, I don't know. I think that obviously Spring, Thrive, SVX, OTA, like all the people here, they're going to be catalysts for that work. People who that reaching out to them, I know that you're always an open ear, and I feel really supported that way. So there's that too. I don't know if I have a good answer.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you. Back to you, Viv.
Okay, Jane, you've been so patiently waiting with your hands up. You may be on mute. So if you can unmute yourself, there you go. And please share your question.
Thank you. Thank you, Carla. That was an incredible sort of story that you have and lots of creative ideas for folks. I think generally across the board, but what I'm hearing from your experiences is a bit more sort of directed to organizations that I would suggest are in sort of a scale-up phase. I work with lots of like really early stage founders trying to get out of the gates. Lots of them that have great ideas to solve problems that might not be at the scale that's appealing to VC, and so therefore are looking for a blended approach to sort of cross the chasm of the valley of death, if for folks that can identify with that metaphor. I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for those of us working in that space where it's just really hard to get even to a pre-seed round, or or even for lots of high impact ventures and solutions that aren't even that may or may not ever really be a fit for that VC finance sort of type of approach. Wondering what you can suggest for us.
What I've seen work really well in that stage is rather than having, I mean, it's kind of a strategic investor, is actually looking for someone that you can be a business unit from them, or a strategic partnership, or they're actually a strategic customer.
Hmm.
So there's always this old saying that sales solves problems. And so if I don't have an investor to get me over that chasm, I would look at someone who has a bigger balance sheet than me, or a bigger bank account, and see whether or not what I'm doing actually adds value to what they're already doing. Especially if we're, as founders, so committed to the impact that really all we care is that it happens, that's when we might be willing to give away some equity, negotiate something like that, so that we actually have a bigger reach. It's instead of being a large, what is it? It increases the size of the pie as opposed to keeping the whole pie, is really the take that I would have on that. The thing I'm very excited about franchising. So remember, we're a franchise. So I literally have over 30 owners owning the 46 locations. And I say this all the time, we don't have to own everything. And I think that we have this whole founder syndrome that we think that we do. And yet, if that's the thing that stops us, like literally my first business, I wish I sold it in the first year. I got offered $80,000. I had worked on it for 3 months. Why the heck didn't I sell it?
Hindsight. Aaron, you've asked a question in the chat, but do you want to come on and ask yourself, or I can also I can read it out in Aaron. Oh, there you are. Please jump in.
I figured out how to unmute, I think.
You're on.
Fantastic. Carla, I've read the book that you put together, which also have to recommend to everyone here, because I was really curious about a lot of the detail, and it's all in the book. So thank you so much for that. I have a question for you about the 50% charitable ownership structure. I'm curious as to if there had been another way to guarantee the impact that you've come up with since developing this.
There could be. It's probably just a lot more paperwork and governance pieces. You could put things in like trust. You could lock things up. Because we didn't know how this was going to go yet. We were still in mass experimentation stage. We decided this was the safest way with the most amount of flexibility, that we didn't have to lock it in, that we could lock it in just this way. Because also in our shareholder agreements, we have a right of first refusal, that old rofer that I love to say. So basically, the existing shareholders, if somebody else wants to sell, the existing shareholders get the first take at it, right? So technically, that was already locked in, but it didn't stop us on being nimble or flexible in any other way, and it didn't lock anything in governance so much as we learn. So remember, we're the first of our kind in this way in Canada that was structured in like as a social purpose holding company with multiple charitable investors. Usually a charity buys it by themselves. This was a different way to do it. And so until we actually got into it, we didn't want to lock anything in stone, because that can be expensive and not always necessary at the get-go when you're still learning.
Thanks, Aaron. I think I see possibly an old colleague of mine, Jeff, has put a question into the chat, and he claims he's new to this. But Jeff, do you want to jump on and ask your question? You may be on mute. No, you may not be.
Sure. Can you
There
hear me?
you are. Yeah.
Hi, Vivian.
Hi.
Nice to see your face.
Great to see you. Great to see you.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Carla, if you could talk a bit more about sort of the governance structure, both of the investment and of the charities themselves, and how, I guess, the views, particularly, I guess, from the charity side, kind of help or hinder these blended finance opportunities. And then for the charities, I guess, how do these opportunities fold into their funding models and, kind of under their not-for-profit mandate as tax-exempt organizations?
Okay, there's a few things in there. Okay, so governance structure and view by charity, and then tax exempt. Okay, great. So The governance structure is that we have a very nimble board. I think this is really important as well. So we literally have 3 people on the board. I'm one of them. And then 2 of my largest charitable investors, both are represented. So that's our 3. Done. And so that means that they can report back. And the third charity isn't represented because they were a very minor shareholder. So the other 2 are quite, they're some of the larger shareholders. That's why we structured it that way. So views by the charity. I'll just run you through. One charity basically invested their money. This is the minor one. Their money is actually to continue to support an LGBTQ2+ program in perpetuity. And so they ended up getting enough grants for the next 4 years, but year 5, they had a problem. So based on the way that we're structuring the dividends, they literally invested in this so that this LGBTQ2+ program will be able to run in perpetuity. Beautiful. So let's go into the next ones. Another charity basically is using this money to seed other social enterprises. So they've been like, they see this as success. They're having these dividends to actually allow them to experiment in more social enterprises and prove out more business models similar to this. The third has actually created, they're an American charity. They actually are creating a CDFI, a community development investment financial institution. I switched that around. They are a 150-year-old charity. We are their first non-loan, their first direct equity investment in 150 years. And the CDFI that they're creating is specifically to promote and support BIPOC ownership throughout North America. So when you see this as like the dividends from these, this is from dividends. So this would be dividends or from a mutual fund, from any stocks, the returns from bonds, their GICs, it doesn't matter. It's the same. So when we look at the tax structure, it doesn't have any implication on our organization. We are a for-profit and our shares are owned a majority by charities. But the charities still have their dividends treated like any other dividends or any other returns that they would have.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Carla, for sharing just an unbelievable amount of information in a very short amount of time. And I want to just thank both of you for the questions and for sharing with everybody. Keith, I'm going to turn it over to you to take us out.
Yeah, thank you. Carla, what a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to tell the story of Just Like Family Home Care and the process and conversations that have actually led you to this place, getting the funding that you need, fueling the growth, fueling the impact, allowing for the discovery of new and unexpected impact, I think is also a really strong takeaway. Just really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks again. Love sharing the story. I hope others are inspired because I see that this could change the world.
Absolutely true. And so for everybody, I just want to highlight once again, a big shout out to Ontario Trillium Foundation and Tracy Robertson for your support of this Blended Finance series. If everybody would make note, the next Blended Finance Summit is locked in February 20th and 21st in Toronto. Check the chat here for the registration link. You'll get a report to that as well, an email that will highlight it. We have recorded this session as well for you to share with your colleagues. Of course, this is a great call to connect with Carla, continue to follow her journey, maybe an opportunity to support in the future, but also an opportunity, I think, to bring other case studies and examples to the table that will help all of us to really accelerate the growth of blended finance in Canada. So just a big shout out to everybody for taking the time. We really appreciate all of you being here. Look forward to seeing hopefully all of you at the Blended Finance Summit in Toronto, our upcoming webinars and case studies. If you do have any case studies that you would like to put forward, like Carla and Just Like Home, then please do contact myself and Vivian. We would love to profile case studies of different blended finance opportunities in Canada. to put out the word, to be able to share them as examples, to be open source, as Carla has been with her sharing. So these are just a couple of things that are, I think, well worth keeping in mind. I hope all of you have an amazing afternoon, morning, depending on where you are in Canada, and look forward to keeping in touch and continuing to share this journey. So thank you for taking the time to join us.